Hi everyone, and welcome to Bioinformatics' first webinar of 2024, Qualitative Market Research 101, from fundamentals to finely tuned results. We're so glad you're all here with us today. Thank you for spending some time with us. I'm Keely Trull, Senior Marketing Manager for Science and Medicine Group. And before we get started, I wanted to just cover a few housekeeping items. First, if you experience any issues throughout the broadcast, please feel free to put those in the chat and I'll work to help you fix them. Second, this presentation will be available on demand after the webinar has concluded. You'll receive an email with information on how to access that. Finally, we will be taking time to answer questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit your questions to the questions tab on your attendee panel at any time. We'll get to as many of those as possible. Leading today's discussion is Michael Becker. Michael is the Director of Business Development at Bioinformatics. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Keely. Thank you all for being part of this webinar. As Keely mentioned, this is our first one of 2024, so we're excited to get some information out there to the masses, our customer base, potential customers, and just really kind of share some information on custom market research. As Keely mentioned, I'm Michael Becker. I'm Director of Business Development here at Science and Medicine Group, and I'll be your presenter today. Just a brief background on me. I've been working in custom market research for nearly 20 years. My educational background is in both business and analytics, and I've done just about anything and everything there is to do in custom market research. So I previously worked at a smaller size company where I wore many hats. My roles there included finding new business, scoping projects, writing surveys, analyzing data, and presenting the findings. And relevant to today's topic, I also was involved in many interviews with customers, with respondents, with the customer base of our clients, and led many qualitative research projects. But here at Science and Medicine Group, I focus on the commercial side, where I work with our customers to find and identify the best research solutions to meet their needs. So the objectives of today, what we want to do is just review what is market research. We'll explore the different types of qualitative market research. We'll learn how to recognize when qualitative research is needed. We'll better understand how to extract meaningful insights from qualitative market research. And then we'll review the do's and don'ts of qualitative market research. So just to give a little background on Science and Medicine Group, we are a firm that provides market research and strategic intelligence services to accelerate decision-making. We were originally founded as Bioinformatics in 1994, and Bioinformatics is our custom market research team that provides quantitative and qualitative services. We are a unique combination of the most reputable brands in life science, healthcare, and medical imaging industries. So over on the right of this slide, you can see many of our brands that a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Some of these you may not be aware are part of Science and Medicine Group, but we do have a very wide net of brands in this space. We currently work with over 400 clients worldwide. We maintain a library of thousands of published syndicated reports, adding new titles annually. And those reports are produced by SDI, Calorama, Bioinformatics, IBO, and a couple of other brands. So we have a lot of content available for you. And then we also have a proprietary AI-driven business intelligence platform called Amplion, which is new to our company. We bought them a little bit over a year ago, and we've had some really good success implementing that with our customer base. So just to give a little bit of background about the services we provide, we do provide a full suite of research and decision-making support solutions. These include market reports, custom secondary research, custom primary research, and our business intelligence platforms. Since this webinar is on custom market research, I will mention that our custom market research team, which is Bioinformatics, includes full teams for both quantitative and qualitative research. The project managers all have real-world bench experience. So they're speaking the same language as our clients and the respondents who are taking part in that research. And included on our teams, we have PhDs, we have scientific experts, business analysts, and data analysts who all come together really nicely just to, who all come together on our various projects, bringing their own expertise and their own know-how to provide high value and actionable insights and information for each study. So just getting into what is market research. The general definition is that it is a set of techniques used to gather information with a goal of understanding a company's target market. And that target market can be a current customer base that you are already aware of, or one that you're looking to explore or get into with new products or services, or just expand that customer base with what you're currently providing. Number two, market research can be used to help determine the viability of a new product or service. It'll help answer questions relating to whether people are interested in your offerings. If they are they willing to buy it? And if so, in what quantity would they buy that? This type of information can really provide you with actionable insights into how to move forward with go-to-market strategies and your overall strategic initiatives. Number three, market research is a way of gathering information for the purpose of market segmentation and or product differentiation. What this means is that it allows you to break the market into smaller groups to see how these customer bases or personas perceive or utilize your company and your products. You're able to compare their feelings and sentiments about your brand and products against those of your competitors in the same market. And lastly, market research typically includes primary and secondary research. Primary research includes things like surveys, in-depth interviews, focus groups, and ethnographic observations, where the secondary research includes things like desk research, as well as literature reviews. Some examples of the secondary research sources are things like publications in journals, press releases, patent filings, quarterly and annual financial filings, government agencies, professional societies, and really anywhere that you can find information regarding your industry and your market. So now, before we get into some of the qualitative information, I want to just give a quick overview of the quantitative market, of quantitative market research, so that way we can compare and contrast this type of research with that qualitative data that we'll get into later. So quantitative research is typically what people are most familiar with and have much more experience with. It is basically a primary market research method where knowledge is obtained directly from the customers. This approach uses surveys to capture data from a large number of respondents. And that is typically done by using online surveys, phone-assisted surveys, paper surveys, or other ways to capture data, such as polling and things like that. It does gather numerical data, and it's collected and analyzed to describe, predict, or control variables of interest. And simply put, what we're trying to do is just measure things with this type of research. The goals of quantitative research include testing causal relationships between variables, making predictions, and generalizing the results to wider populations. The methods used to collect the data are typically close-ended questions, meaning that the answer options will typically be provided to the respondent in a check one format or a check all format. There's obviously some different ways to go about these types of questions, but that's what you will normally see. You can select an answer of a yes, no, for instance, or select all of the above that are applicable. So people are very familiar with that. The resulting output is quantitatively measured. So for example, X% of respondents purchase Y product. That would be some of that output. And lastly, the quantitative market research, you need larger numbers for data to be statistically significant. So in order to split any segment from a data set, we typically want to look at least 30 respondents for statistical significance. So when you put together a survey and you want to start looking at regions or market segments or application areas, you can see if we need 30 per breakout that we want to observe, then those numbers get larger and larger in terms of that sample size that we'll need. So with quantitative market research, the results are objective and conclusive. So the desired outcomes that we're looking for will help quantify results, they'll validate hypotheses, and it helps us make decisions. So some of the types of quantitative studies that we've done recently include things like brand reputation or brand equity, brand loyalty, customer experience, customer purchasing journeys, satisfaction surveys. Oftentimes for anything that has an M&A component to it, if somebody's trying to merge or acquire a new business, just doing the due diligence of that company that they're trying to acquire or merge with, they'll do studies with us to make sure that that is a reputable company. They are who they're portraying themselves to be, and they can use us as a third-party verification for that. We'll do market sizing surveys, customer segmentation surveys, product concept testing, and purchase drivers. And then the last two that I have on that list are for pricing studies and ad concept or messaging testing. Those are two types of studies that we can do as kind of a typical format, or we can apply some more advanced techniques like conjoints to get to pricing elasticity, or with the ad concept or message testing, doing a max diff type of study where people make trade-offs and determine which kind of messaging works best for them. So for the qualitative market research, we'll kind of shift gears and just jump into this. As we'll discuss, while there is quite a bit of overlap in all types of custom market research, the processes, uses of it, and the interpretation of qualitative research is much different than that of quantitative research. So similar to the quantitative approach, research using qualitative methods is also primary market research, meaning that, again, this is where knowledge is obtained directly from the customers. Unlike quantitative research, where we are looking at numbers, the data for qualitative research is focused on words. So qualitative research is concerned with understanding a situation or behavior from the interviewee's perspective. And what we want to know is more about their own unique experiences. The information gathered is based on opinions, decision-making, rationale, motivations, thinking, attitudes, and experiences. And a big difference here is instead of closed-ended questions where answer choices are provided in surveys, for instance, the qualitative research utilizes open-ended response questions. So specifically what we're doing is we're looking for the whys and hows in our questions. So it's not going to be, do you do this? Do you utilize this product or service? Yes or no? We're not doing that. We're asking them, which ones are you utilizing? Why are you utilizing them? How are you utilizing them? It gives much more in-depth information that allows the interviewer to really kind of pull on some threads and even extract more information from the interviewee. So it's a great way just to learn about people's perceptions, their behaviors, their feelings, their workflows, so many different ways to just get at really high quality information. So the data is descriptive, meaning that it describes something that can be observed. And instead of looking at spreadsheets, charts, graphs, and tables, the qualitative data are analyzed by themes from descriptions of those interviews. So that's a big thing, that we're looking at themes, not necessarily percentages saying yes or no, or percentages using this brand or that brand. What we're looking for is the themes amongst the different interviewers or interviewees. Qualitative analysis allows for ambiguous and contradictions in the data between different people. So it is not neatly categorized into set responses like quantitative data. So that's a tricky thing that needs to be kind of recognized before getting into any qualitative data, is that people can look at this data differently. There is ambiguity, there is contradictions. Everybody is not going to answer the exact same way. So when you're looking at the results, it's not going to be nice and tidy and neat like quantitative data. It's going to be a little bit more jumbled, and that's where those themes come into place, where an expert analyst is able to put together a bigger story about what this data are telling us. So the data is subjective and typically requires that expert to interpret it in an unbiased way. And that's a really big thing because that bias is pretty prevalent in qualitative research, where if the interviewer has bias about what they think the respondent should be telling them or what they want to see, they can typically guide that conversation a little bit in their own favor. So having that unbiased moderator is really, really important. And having that unbiased analyst is also really important, where they're just focusing on what that what the results are, what the respondents are talking about, and ignoring the noise and just of that bias and looking directly at what is in front of them. So whereas quantitative data may have hundreds, if not thousands of responses, qualitative data is based on a much, much smaller sample size. And depending on the research needs, qualitative data can be just from a select few individuals. So big difference there. The flow and progression of the interview is less planned than a survey. So there usually is a discussion guide where there are certain topics and questions that the moderator will want to get to, but the moderator does have the flexibility to pull on those threads. If something comes up from the response of the respondent that is really interesting and is worthwhile to discuss more, the moderator has that flexibility to pivot on the fly. Lastly, the greatest thing about qualitative research is you will learn what you didn't know you didn't know. And what I mean by that is if you have a good moderator conducting these discussions, they will be able to pull those threads of information or thoughts or opinions about things that were never even considered as part of the reasons behind doing the study. So these will be things that can open your eyes to new ideas or approaches or ways of looking at the market or your product that you never even thought about. And those are those little nuggets that just really kind of make, these projects worthwhile, because you're getting information that you never even knew or thought about existed, and it can help guide you with your strategic decisions. It can help you with your marketing. It can help you with your products. It can help you in all sorts of different ways, just because you're having those conversations and you're doing it with a person who can really, get that information out of the person being interviewed. So the way that we look to get the insights and how we uncover them or discover them is we want to ask things like perceptions. These types of questions are, how do you perceive or describe your product or service? What do you know about your product or service? Or what do they know about your product or service? We want to ask things about attitudes. Do they like your product or service? Is that something that they're interested in? If not, why? Do they support your product or service? Would they recommend that to somebody else, another colleague, to use? Opinions and emotions. How do they feel about your product or service? Does it make them happy when they, get a new box or a new item or a new version of your product or service? Or does it bring up thoughts of frustration or annoyance? Or, what are those pain points? What are those feelings that they feel when they're using it? What are the supporting details about how they feel? What's the reason on that? How are they feeling? Why are they feeling that way? Getting to those hows and whys again is really important with qualitative research. And then beliefs and persuasion. How deep-rooted are their opinions about your product or service? Is it something that they kind of just think about and, then as soon as they use your product and service, don't think about again? Or does it leave a lasting impact with them? And if so, why? What is it that your product or service provides them that makes them have that nice or not nice emotional connection with them? And then lastly with that is, how was their opinion about your product or service formed? Is it because they saw marketing messaging? Is it because they use it in their current lab or they used it in previous labs? Is it because they got a recommendation from a colleague? How did they find out about it? Finding out these pieces of information are really important, and these types of questions aren't types of questions that can necessarily fit on a quantitative survey. These are questions that need to be asked in a qualitative manner to get behind the meaning of it, to get to those hows and whys about these different areas that you're looking to find information about. So with the qualitative market research, what it seeks to do is describe a topic more than measure it, right? So we're not trying to get that quantitative information, we're trying to describe it with our themes. The desired outcomes are to explore a hypothesis. We want to probe or go deep into the underlying what's, whys, and hows. And then we just want to seek to understand. That's the whole purpose of this, not just getting an answer, but understanding why they feel the way they do. How are they utilizing your products and services? What is the intention of it? Things that just don't fit into those categories or boxes that a survey provides. We're able to get all that information. We're able to go really deep with the respondent to figure out the really important items and those what's, whys, and hows. So the types of qualitative studies that we provide, a lot of these are similar to quantitative studies in just their kind of like general generic names, but what we're getting after in them is obviously very different, where we're looking to describe something more than measure it. So again, we'll do ad concept or message testing, brand loyalty studies, again, purchase stickiness factors, finding out why people would switch from one brand to another or one product to another. Those are kind of questions that aren't easily put on a survey. Customer value perceptions, customer satisfaction, early product concept and receptivity testing, product selection and customer requirements, understanding customer workflows and pain points. That's a really good one too. Just, why are those pain points so painful? Not just saying that it is painful, but why? That's really good information for any product. Website usability. And then that last one is persona validation and development. And it's highlighted in blue because our qualitative team wanted me to make sure that I highlighted this one. This is often an overlooked area for qualitative market research. Basically, what this is most companies have some sort of personas built for their customer base. This type of person fits this customer profile, and here's how we're going to message to them. Here's how we're going to sell to them. Here's what they're going to purchase. You'll segment them out in different ways. But what we can do with the qualitative studies is we can validate that. We can help you develop those personas. And some of that is by, doing message testing during the interview. We can talk to them. We can find out, are they really fitting together into that kind of persona that you have already built? And we can do this pretty easily and quickly without a whole lot of interviews. Typically, we're looking for 3 to 5 interviews per persona for us to get decent information to validate or develop personas for you. And another really nice thing by doing this is we're also able to find negative personas. So meaning, are there customer types that we can find out for you that will not buy your products? They're not interested, they're not the right fit. And by knowing that, you can save time and resources by not fully ignoring them, but not putting forth the same type of efforts that you put forth to that customer base and those personas that are interested in your products. So it's a really good way to really learn a lot more about your persona types that your marketing teams and product teams are using, is by doing some qualitative research just to validate that and help develop those a little bit better. So finding the right respondent, this is really important, the recruitment effort. So the data that you're doing through either qualitative or quantitative research is completely useless if you're talking to the wrong people. They might be able to give you answers, but those answers are not necessarily relevant if you're not looking at the right type of respondent profile. So as you're doing any sort of research, you want to be able to define what that ideal respondent looks like, and what market segment are they in, which type of organizations do they work for, what regions should they be located in? Are you selling only in North America or Europe? Are you going into APAC? Are there specific countries that you are looking to expand into or are currently selling into that you need information on? With regional profiling, you do need to have some other considerations, especially for qualitative interviews where it's going to be a person doing moderation. You need to think about their time zones Are you able to find a time that will work for both the moderator and the interviewee? And also, is there going to be any language barriers? With quantitative surveys, oftentimes we'll have translations applied to the survey in order to make it able to be completed by respondents in specific countries. For qualitative interviews, that's a little bit different because you can, find somebody who might be able to speak the language of the person you're looking to interview. But then if you're trying to interpret that on your own end, those are going to have to be translated back. There's going to have to be a whole bunch of different steps involved to get you the information in a readable or listenable format. So just some things to consider when you're looking at that respondent profile. Should that respondent who is being interviewed or taking a survey, should they have purchasing influence or authority? Obviously, for any pricing study, that is a necessity. Should there be any brand or instrument usage requirements? Are you looking for people using your own products, your own services? Are you looking for those who, do you want to compare yourself to a competitor where you need them to be using that competitor's products or services? What kind of title are you looking for? And then there's obviously a host of other factors if you're looking for application areas, workflows, things like that, that you want to kind of lay out when you're figuring out what that ideal respondent profile is. Now, finding that respondent, once you have that, is another challenge. So we have our own panel here at Science and Medicine Group called the Science Advisory Board. There are other vendors who have other panels as well. Some people use customer lists, which we don't necessarily think is a great idea because there's going to be some bias involved there. But our panel is one that has been around for about 30 years. It is highly vetted scientific experts are included on there. They're active members within the scientific community. They maintain good standing on our panel. And what that means is if we send out surveys or interview requests and they show up to that interview or they don't show up at all or they're not a good interview, we note that in our own databases, and that person won't be reached out to again. Or if we find on a survey that they're straight lining the survey or not answering things appropriately, then they get flagged and they won't be reached out to again for surveys or interviews. So they have to maintain that good standing on our panel. They have to be providing good feedback in order to be invited to any of our research initiatives. Since we do have our own panel, we do have exceptional targeting ability, so we already know some of this information. We know where they're located. We know what company they work for. We know, what their title is. So what we're able to do is we're able to pre-screen our respondents for any research initiative and really hone in on those people most applicable. That way we don't have to send an invite out to 50,000 people every single time we do a project. We can send it out to a much more narrow group, ensuring that we have higher incidence rates, ensuring that we're getting the right people to take part in the research efforts. So I mentioned the demographics that we already know, and then we also have additional information from those respondents from previous surveys or interviews that they've taken. So if we are asking something about brand usage or instrument usage, if they filled that out on another survey, we now have that information available, which really allows us to target them even more specifically. And since they are part of our panel and are part of an opt-in community and take part in these surveys and interviews often, we are able to have predictable response rates for any project that we do. So we're not necessarily flying blind anytime we say, hey, we're looking for 20 interviews today or 200 respondents on a survey. We're able to really have predictable response rates, meaning that we're not going to be putting together methodologies and sample plans that we're not able to fulfill on our end, which is very important when there's timelines involved where you need information quickly. You don't want to start a project, get into it, and then quickly realize, or not even quickly realize, but realize way down the road that you're not going to get the number of respondents that you were looking for. So there are several different types of qualitative market research, and we'll kind of hit on all of these here. The first one is one that people are most familiar with. It's going to be in-depth interviews. And what this is, it's just detailed interviews usually conducted on a one-to-one basis with an experienced moderator. So, we might be looking for 20 interviews for a project. The moderator would sit down individually with each of those 20 interviewees, have that discussion, go through the discussion guide, ask the questions. As I just mentioned, there usually is a semi-structured discussion guide where that kind of lays out the most important topics and questions that we want to get through, but that moderator does have the flexibility to go into other areas of interest that might come up during the interview. The moderator's notes, recordings, and transcripts can all be collected for analysis. If you want to watch the recording after the fact, that would be available, or if you want to read transcripts, you can do searches in there and things like that. You can also do that as well. So just a quick case study for an in-depth interview. We conducted a one-on-one interview with biotech pharma respondents who use immunoassay, and then showed them a stimulus for a new product concept. So we had, an image, we had different imagery available of pictures of the product that we shared with them. So then we assessed their current workflows and pain points, and were able to understand how they would want to use this new product, as well as what features would be most important. So again, getting at that information, not just necessarily get a rating of I like this or I dislike this, or a ranking of this feature is the best. We were able to have that conversation with those interviewees and find out more about why they felt that way. So it was a very, very successful project. So the benefits to these in-depth interviews is that they're easy to schedule. Usually as we have a moderator available, and then whatever time works best for the person being interviewed, they would just schedule that and we would meet with them. Video conferencing now is obviously very prevalent, and that allows for us to do our interviews on a global scale. Back a long time ago, you had to do these things in person or over a phone, but now with things like Zoom, Teams, and other video conferencing platforms, we're able to talk with people all over the world pretty much at any time of day. With this, another benefit is that you can use a variety of methods, such as that product stimulus, which I explained on that case study. You have whiteboarding, A/B testing during the discussions. All these platforms for video now allow so many different ways to kind of show images, to write things directly on the screen, to show a video. So we have all this ability to show these stimuluses about products during these interviews that really kind of brings it to life that didn't used to be possible before. And then finally, that benefit I've talked about is you can change questions as the discussion evolves. If something is really interesting, or if something is a pain point that might be worth learning more about, the moderator can go into much more in-depth detail, pull on that thread, get that additional information, and make that project something really special. So just some considerations to think about for in-depth interviews. The first one is the number of respondents needs to be at least 7 per segment to identify trends. So by segment, that would be anything from like a market segment if we're looking at academia or pharma, or from any specific region like North America or Europe. You'd want to have at least 7 per segment to identify trends from that group. Highly trained moderators are important to gain honest and actionable feedback. I mentioned before some of the bias that can be involved. So by having a trained moderator, they can keep any bias out of that conversation. And then the comfort of the respondent is important to keep the data clean, not asking about confidential information from them. If you start asking what their name is, or things about them that is personal, that could quickly end the interview or make them really uncomfortable. And the last thing you want to do is turn the interview into like a sales pitch, which that can frequently happen for people who are kind of do that on their own because they're just excited about their product, or especially if it's a new product concept, they want to talk about it, they want to sell it, but that's not the purpose of the interview. It's not a sales pitch. It's to learn more about what the customer thinks and feels about that product. So some of the best practices to identify trends, I mentioned it should be 7 per segment. For any study, you probably want 7 to 10. 10 is what we typically recommend just for an overall project. But if we are looking specifically just at one segment, we can do 7. Using that skilled moderator, again, really important to keep that bias out. The interview should be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Anything less than that is typically not enough time to gather quality feedback. And anything more than an hour tends to decrease the quality of the data from the respondent, and that's mainly due to fatigue. If you're talking for an hour plus straight, it's just hard. So we think that 30 minutes to an hour is that sweet spot in order to get really reliable information. The visual stimulus, again, is beneficial for deep dives into product concepts, and a one-on-one concept should be maintained. And what I mean by that is you don't want to necessarily have 2 or 3 people on the interviewer side, versus one person being interviewed. That can feel a little bit overwhelming, where it's almost like, all right, it's one person versus 3. That's a little bit intimidating for the interviewee, and it could lead to just shorter responses than wanting to get out of that discussion and just keep moving on. So that one-on-one makes things much more personable and much easier for the discussion to flow. The second type is focus groups. So traditionally, focus groups were 6 to 12 respondents who were grouped together, either in person or through a virtual platform, to answer questions about a topic of interest. Virtual focus groups can be conducted with dyads, which is 2, or triads, which is 3, of individuals to ease scheduling and dive deeper into questions. Observations about the group's dynamic, answers, and relationships to one another can help answer important research questions. So in this type of qualitative research, by having multiple people involved, that discussion can often flow and get into some really interesting areas, because the people can feed off of each other. They can play off of each other. So one person may respond to a question, another person could say, yes, I feel the same way, and then expand on it more, or say, no, I disagree, and then they can go into their own kind of thoughts and experiences as well. So it's a really nice way where it just helps that discussion get going, as long as that moderator is in control and can keep that conversation going. In focus groups, the data collection can vary, so clients can participate or watch from back rooms, and sessions can be recorded and transcripts ordered. So a case study from one that we did, a focus group was conducted with executives, marketing, and sales professionals from a large-scale biotech while undergoing a logo and branding refresh. So we assessed how respondents felt about the company's current branding, showed them multiple options of new logos, and then recorded their immediate reactions. So we got that feedback. They're not just verbal feedback, but then we can also see their body language, their facial expression when they look at these logos, which really helps kind of tie everything together with how they feel for these different brand logo options that we gave them. So the benefits of the focus group is it can gain multiple points of views very quickly. A client/stakeholder can participate or watch in real time from a back room. The group dynamic allows for participants to mention points they might have glossed over or forgotten in a one-on-one interview. Again, by having multiple people talking, it can just spur some thoughts in some of the focus group members' minds that then they're able to share that they wouldn't have remembered to share during a one-on-one interview. So some considerations are that participants can be wary of delving into sensitive topics around strangers. They don't necessarily know who these other people are who are part of the focus groups. Are they part of a competing organization? There could be some defensive walls up for those people who are in the focus groups. It can be difficult and expensive. How are you going to schedule it? Is it going to be at a conference? Is it going to be virtual? How much are you going to pay? So there's a lot of things to think about there on that front. And then the group dynamic means respondents might be hesitant to express feelings, especially in the opposition of someone else. And people's personalities vary. So if some people are very assertive or aggressive and they may take control of that focus group, other people might be a little bit passive or shy and don't want to share their opinion if it differs from other people. So again, having a really good moderator to keep that in check, making sure people aren't dominating the discussion and making sure that everybody is included is really important to get that wide array of information from the group. So some best practices, the smallest N for a full study should be around 8. We typically will do groups of 4 to 8 respondents at a time. If with that 8, you might be looking at 1 or 2 different groups together. If you get too many, people get left out. And if you don't have enough, then you're kind of doing a one-on-one or a dyad or triad. So we usually find, 4 to 8 can be done at a time. 5 to 6 is a pretty good recommendation, but you have a little bit of leeway in how many respondents should be included in each group. Again, using that skilled moderator to make sure everyone's on track and that there's nobody dominating the conversation and that everybody is involved. The durations for the focus groups are a little bit longer than the in-depth interviews. We're looking for usually 1.5 hours to 2 hours since there's so many different people involved. This allows for enough time for everybody to be able to share, but not too much time where people get fatigued. Again, the visual stimulus can be very advantageous for product concepts. And again, the in-person focus groups allows for the sponsor to be in the room. So they're able to get a real feel and connect with their customer base if they're in that room, whether it's behind a closed door, if they're watching on video, but they can kind of see what's going on. They can get a feel for like the overall vibe of the room and the discussion. So it's a really nice way for that stakeholder or that sponsor to learn a little bit more than just reading a transcript or watching a recording. Another one is ethnographies. This one is a study where researchers observe and or interact with participants in their real life environment. So it uses unobtrusive or direct observation methods. After initial observations, a guide can be developed to help structure notes. So essentially what's happening here is we'd have somebody go out to a lab or wherever that might be, the person's place of work, and observe them in their natural environment. So a case study would be a life science company distributed a new consumable kit to respondents who then opened and unboxed the reagents while on video with the moderator. And the purpose for this was that it allowed the client to see how scientists were interacting with their product packaging in that lab environment. So we're able to see how they opened it, what they did with it, and that was the main concern for the study, is that packaging of the product. What were they doing with it? How did they dispose of it? How did easily were they able to open it? So those are the things that they wanted to really find out. So the benefits of this is it's excellent at identifying bottlenecks or issues of workflows. It can be very helpful for user interface and user experience testing. How are people using an instrument? How are people interacting with that package? How are people, accepting of customer service or whatever that might be, right? All the products and services, how are they being interacted with, and what's that user experience? This is really good for being able to learn more about that in their real life environment. It's also helpful for early project development or improving existing product lines. Again, you can observe that workflow bottleneck or pain points in real time, see what's actually happening. Sometimes, frustration on people's faces can happen, and the moderator or the person observing can see that, and that person may not be able to actually verbalize that in an interview or a focus group, but seeing it in real time, the observer is able to note that and then make recommendations. So some considerations here: observation bias is critical in any ethnography, especially direct observation. You can't come in with specific bias thinking that should go a specific way. You need to be open and receptive. This can be expensive, and figuring out the logistics is a little bit tricky. Are you flying somebody out to their lab? Are you hosting people in a simulated lab, at your headquarters, which isn't necessarily going to be the same as a real life environment, but at least it's kind of a proxy. How are you going to get there? What are the logistics? Those are things we have to consider. And then being in a respondent's own space can present stronger issues of confidentiality than other research methods. do you need to sign NDAs? Do you have to get permission? What do you have to do to make sure that confidentiality is being maintained? So just some considerations to think about. So now we will get into some mixed method studies. And what this is really, really great for just learning about customers, products, anything you can think of. What it is, it's utilizing both qualitative and quantitative data collection in the same study to achieve greater insights. So a case study for this is we had a biotech company who wanted to better understand why physicians were not ordering its diagnostic test. So first, we did a small qualitative study and interviewed clinicians who were current and potential customers. And then the findings from that qualitative study were used to hypothesize several personas. So, early adopters, those people needing more information on the test, hesitant to change. So we created personas from those qualitative interviews. And then we did a quantitative study and designed that to confirm whether these personas and identities to confirm the personas and then identify the best areas to focus new marketing. So we're able to kind of piece that all together, build those personas, figure that out, and then we were able to confirm the hypothesis through the quantitative survey. So the benefits of this is the mixed method studies is that it can go a couple of different ways. You can do qual then quant, like just described in that case study, or you can do quant then qual, depending on the needs. So the quals can help better define the research objectives to have a more focused quantitative study. So especially if this is a new area where you haven't gotten into, one study that we recently did, it was a brand new product going into a brand new area for one of our clients. And what we found is that when we were putting together some of the survey, that the language that the client was using to describe the product did not necessarily match the language of the people using the product. So we ended up doing a qualitative study. We were able to figure out that there was this weird language barrier of how we were defining things and the terminology being used, and we're able to make the survey questions on the quantitative survey much more robust and much more in line and much more easily understood by the respondents by having a qualitative study first. It gave us a lot of information. It gave the client so much information about the market that they didn't think they thought they already knew, but really didn't have as big of a grasp as they thought they had. But that qualitative interview before we went to the survey gave them a whole new look at terminology, usage, things like that, that really fine-tune the survey itself. Then also quals can help a VOC add a voice of customer and answer follow-up questions to quantitative studies. So what we can do there is often we might do a quantitative survey. The results then bring up additional questions from the client. They'll say, why is this happening? Why are respondents answering this way? We thought it didn't validate our hypothesis. It actually invalidated it. Why is that happening? So what we're able to do then is do follow-up qualitative interviews after we did the survey to then ask those questions to get, dig deeper, figure out why these things are going on, those whys and hows about that we're not able to capture on the survey, we were able to answer and are able to answer in a qualitative interview after the fact. So a couple considerations with the mixed method studies. These kinds of studies will always take longer than an individual qual or quant. Obviously, we're doing two different rounds of research. Sometimes we can do them almost in parallel, or would start with a qualitative study, start building a survey draft while that's occurring, and then fine tune the survey based off the qualitative results. But that's still going to take more time than just doing one or the other. And then one thing to note is not every respondent who agrees to participate in one research method will agree to participate in the other. So if somebody does a qualitative interview, we can't guarantee that they'll fill out a quantitative survey, and vice versa. If they filled out the quantitative survey, we can't necessarily guarantee that they will be willing to provide additional details about their responses in a qualitative interview after the fact. So some of the best practices is that timing of the quantitative and qualitative portions can vary depending on the goal of the study itself. If we did quantitative first, trends identified in the quantitative portion of the study can be further examined with a qualitative dive to ask the why. Participants who chose to answer in a particular fashion can be singled out for the qualitative study to ask why they answered the way that they did. So that's kind of the advantage of us having our panel, is that if somebody answers a question that is a little bit different than the client expects, we can actually single that person out and then invite them for a qualitative interview to get more information from them. If we didn't have our own panel, we wouldn't know who that person is because of confidentiality reasons, but that's a really nice advantage that we have. If you're doing the qualitative first, it's often beneficial for product concepts, just as I mentioned, to get that verbiage down to better understand features, things like that. The qualitative studies can be used to identify bottlenecks or areas that need to be addressed by the company. And it can be used to guide the quantitative portion of the project. For example, the questions to be asked, the answer options, product features to include, etc. And the goals of each part of the study should be clearly identified at the start of the project. So how to recognize when to use qualitative research. So first thing you want to do is answer some of these questions, right? Is the purpose of my research to test an existing hypothesis or to explore perceptions? Do I want to measure opinions or understand the why behind the customer opinions? Do I need to use the data to extrapolate for a larger population, or are directional trends sufficient for my needs? Am I choosing methods and designing studies based on best practices? Does my budget and or time constraints influence my research method? And then finally, how will I use the data from the study? So on those first three, you can see those orangey colored examples. Those are for quantitative surveys, things that you were wanting to measure or test hypotheses or extrapolate data from. The ones in green would be for the qualitative, perceptions, answering those whys, getting the directional trends. So those are the things you want to do. Now, the tricky part is that last one, how are you going to use that data? Figuring out beforehand what is the purpose of this research. And that's where, we certainly can help figure out the best research method to put forth in order to get you those answers that you're looking for. So this is just kind of a summary page of what we've talked about. It just kind of breaks out when you want to use quantitative versus qualitative, the applications and formats. It's just a nice little cheat sheet here. I'm not going to go over it because we just kind of ran through it, but it's good information to have as a handout. So how to extract meaningful insights from qualitative market research. So now you've done all these interviews or focus groups or ethnographies. What do you do with the data? So qualitative data is very different than quantitative data. It is unstructured or semi-structured. So how do you organize it? Generally, and if you have lots and lots of data, you're going to need to kind of follow some specific steps. You'd want to prepare, clean, and organize that qualitative data in a way that is usable. You would need to code the data. So, pulling out specific words that are used or themes that are presented from the interviewee to put together a more robust output that shows a bigger story about the results. You'll want to analyze the findings and identify patterns and themes, and then you'll want to create reports, summaries, write-ups, and write-ups of the insights. So the qualitative research can be highly subjective, as we talked about before. It's very possible that two people could read and review transcripts and recordings and come out with a couple different perspectives about what they're saying and different interpretations. So that you need to keep that in mind. You need to avoid your biases when analyzing the results. Again, it is really easy to see or hear what you want to hear and just block out the rest. So you have to keep that open mind and really just pay attention to the information and the data that's in front of you. There is software available to help analyze the qualitative data. So there's a variety of different softwares that can be used. Some are good, some are bad, but those are available. And then in experienced qualitative researchers, they're able to build out highly informative reports that tell the story. And that's a really big important part, is you need like have those results tell you something. It's not just, respondent A said X, Y, and Z, and respondent B said A, B, and C, right? You need to be able to pull out those themes. You need to be able to tell a story about what the results are telling you. So the qualitative deliverables, this will kind of depend on the vendor, or if you're doing it yourself, what you're able to put together. We typically provide video recordings of the interviews. We will provide transcripts, and that would be in both AI and human form transcripts. AI transcripts, obviously, the jargon, scientific jargon does not get picked up appropriately, and we see some really weird words in there that are clearly not what we're talking about. So we do have a human go through and fix all of that. So we do have AI and human transcripts. We do provide reports with summaries of the qualitative methods, the SWOT analysis, and key findings of the trends. At the bottom of this page, you'll see some excerpts from a syndicated report we put together on synthetic biology that was all qualitative based. You'll see that the report itself has a lot of narrative in it, right? You're not going to see those charts and graphs and tables like you would see in a quantitative report where it's focusing on data. This is all about kind of storytelling and information and pulling out the themes. So a little bit different than some reports that people are used to seeing. So now to just go over some of the do's and don'ts of qualitative research. I'm going to start with the don'ts because I don't want to end this with things that you shouldn't be doing. I'd rather kind of focus that first, and then we'll say, here are the things that you should be doing to leave that as kind of the last thought. So for the don'ts, don't be fixated on having set responses to questions. This is a flexible discussion guide that you'd be using for an interview or focus group. So you don't have to be rigid in what you're doing. You don't have to have specific answers. You don't have to guide that respondents to the respondent to answer in a very specific way. So don't be fixated on those set responses. Don't try to cram qualitative data into a quantitative format. If you are doing qualitative research, don't try to make all these charts and graphs and things like that. That's not the purpose of it. Everybody wants to try to have numeric information to make decisions on, but qualitative research is not built for that. So if you try to do it, you're going to be missing out. You're going to be making assumptions, and it's not going to be representative of the information that you gathered. Don't be biased. Again, keep an open mind. Don't focus your thoughts on what you want the respondent to be saying, but for what they really are saying. Don't believe that casual customer calls count as qualitative research. If you're calling up some of your clients, that's not necessarily the same as doing interviews. They're not going to react the same way. They're not going to talk to you the same way as an unbiased third-party firm. So don't think that counts as qualitative research. It's good customer service. It's not good qualitative research. Don't just wing the interviews if you're moderating. Have a set discussion guide, at least to follow a little bit. There is flexibility to go off of that, but you at least want some sort of outline to follow to make sure that the discussion goes well. Don't lead the interviewee to the responses that you want to hear. Again, don't be biased. So the do's, do have a well thought out objective for the research. Do put time and effort into building the discussion guide. Do have flexibility with how interviews are conducted. So just again, be prepared to pivot if needed to pull on those threads of additional information. Do use an experienced moderator or a qualitative researcher. That's the best way to get the most out of these projects. Do expect to receive incredibly valuable insights about your customers. And do be prepared to learn what you didn't know you didn't know. Again, you will find out information you never even knew that you were even looking for. So it's really, really great when those nuggets of information come out during these types of interviews. And lastly, do reach out if your team, to our team, if you are in need of qualitative or quantitative research. Again, we have a full qualitative team here, and we're able to help scope things out, at least have discussions. If that project moves forward with us, great. If not, we're just always happy to help, and we love talking about research. So yeah, definitely reach out and we will help you in any way that we can. So I know we're kind of at our time here, but you know, I'll pass it back to Keely for kind of the ending and questions.
Okay, great. Yep, thanks so much, Michael. That was a lot of really good information in that presentation. So I know we are at the top of the hour, but if you do have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the questions part of the control panel. You know, likely we won't get to everything today, but we will follow back up with you all about any questions that you had. I did also want to let everyone know that a PDF of the slides from today's webinar can be found in the handouts section of your control panel. And you'll also be receiving an on-demand recording to your inbox in the case you want to listen in again at a later date or share it with a colleague, whatever the case may be, we encourage you to do that. So I did, Michael, have one question come through during the presentation. How long does a typical qualitative project take, would you say? Is there an average? Does it depend based on your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, it will definitely depend on how many interviews that would need to take place, you know, what the purpose is, who we're trying to reach. If it's a harder recruit, it'll take a little bit more time to find the right people. And a lot of it also is just availability of working with the client for getting a discussion guide. But I would say typically we look around 4 to 6 or 7 weeks is a pretty typical timeline. Some of that will vary based off of, again, the criteria of the respondent, availability of the client to work with us to finalize discussion guides, screeners, and that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we did have another question just come through asking, what do you mean by in-person focus groups?
So in-person focus groups would be if you're actually in person. So if the person is directly in front of you, if you're, let's say you're at a conference or an event and you're able to rent a room, you'd be able to invite people, you know, 4 to 6 people, let's say, into that room to do a focus group. So they would be there in person, and then you'd be able to have those questions asked to that group as a whole. We also do have the virtual focus groups where we can do that online through video platforms, but an in-person one would be at some sort of event, or if it's, you know, at a lab or a headquarters or whatever that might be, but it would be actually in person.
Okay, great. You're welcome. And then we'll do one more, Michael, if you have time. So for people who are, you know, doing market research themselves for the first time, would you recommend they try to start with a quantitative approach or qualitative approach? Or again, I imagine the answer is it depends, but I'll leave it to you to answer that.
Yes. So again, it will depend. You know, that's where we like to be really consultative on our end and trying to figure out the best methodology for our clients. So having those discussions of project discovery, we'd go through some of those items of, you know, what is the main objective of the research? What are you trying to learn about? Are you trying to measure things that get you to market estimates or numeric information that you can then apply to your strategic initiatives? Or do you want to know those whys of why people have pain points, why people like your product, why people like your brand? So just having those discussions with the stakeholders, figuring out, you know, how you're going to use that data, that really helps guide us to which direction to send you. You know, does it make more sense to do the qualitative because you want those whys and hows, or does it make more sense to do quantitative because maybe you're looking for market estimates or you know, brand scores, NPS scores, things like that.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Michael. So we're over time for today. So I'll say if you have any follow-up questions, please email us at info@bioinfoinc.com. And we did just put that email address in the chat, so it'll be easy for you guys to get a hold of. I'm going to keep the webinar line open for a few minutes, so any of you who want to download the slides from the handout section will have time to do so. And we do encourage you to keep up with us on LinkedIn to just see what other webinars we have coming up in the future. So we'll have several this year around topics similar to this one, and we hope to see you all again. So Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.